Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today I want to talk about the Scarlet Keys Investigator cards that I haven't really gotten to play with yet. In my previous video, I went through the 50 cards that I think are so bad that I don't need to playtest them, and the cards that I've seen playtested. I now have 70 cards left, the ones laid out here, to go through and talk about. And let's start with Charlie Kane. Charlie Kane makes me aggressively sad. Because before this expansion, I had removed the bad tier from my Investigator tier list. I thought that even the worst characters in the game, Skids, Untabooed Lola, and the like, I thought they were still passable. But I'm not convinced that Charlie Kane is passable. I've theory crafted a deck for him. I'm going to play him through Scarlet Keys on the channel very soon. Because I have to test this, because currently I have a bad tier that I've renamed to Charlie Kane tier because he's the only person in it. Because having a terrible stat line like Calvin and the promise of your ability giving you stats isn't good. Calvin is not a great character. He's just passable. But Calvin's assets that he plays to trigger his ability and make his gimmick function are assets that make him functionally invincible. They're things like Pete Sylvester and Jessica Hyde. The assets you play in Charlie Kane just make your stat line not trash. They don't give you any additional benefit. He's basically setting up to be a Calvin Wright that can die. Except I'm pretty sure it's a lot worse than that. And I had playtested him. I playtested him in true solo through Riddles and Rain, the first Scarlet Keys scenario. And I've done it 3 times with 2 different decks. And both times I had the same experience. In your first turns when you're playing allies and then using your allies on one test, it's pretty efficient and it feels really good. He feels like a good investigator while he's setting up. But the moment you get to a turn where you aren't going to move and you aren't going to play an asset, and you're just at a location with something to do for 3 actions, you realize that Charlie Kane has a really hard time passing 3 tests in 1 turn. And that includes the Mythos phase. And every single time, like, he completed the first act on tempo doing really well. And then some point during the second act, I was like, oh shit, what do I even do? And I just didn't want to play the character after that. But I'm gonna play him. I'm gonna see if he's as bad as I think he is. Bonnie Walsh is a great asset, by the way. She's essentially 3 question marks when you exhaust her with Charlie Kane. And if you have her exhausted, it lets you ready another ally asset, so even more question marks. She's really, really good. Burden of Leadership is not a bad card at all. Like, there are worse weaknesses. You want to avoid drawing cards during your turn if you've already exhausted your ally assets, because they'll force you to deal damage to them. This is basically one of those more rough weaknesses where it nearly skips your turn. It's not terrible though. I should point out that there was a rules errata for this, where the original version you can technically exhaust an exhausted ally, and even though it's failed, that's still allowed over choosing the damage, but they're using errata to fix that. That's not actually part of the game, that was just a mistake. And since there's only 1 neutral card left, let's talk about the Hyperphysical Shotcaster. If you look at this card and you get worried because, well, the initial card doesn't do anything. Everything it does is over here. It starts with 4 Aether. As a lightning bolt, you can shift between abilities, and then as an action, you can use whatever ability you're currently on. And yeah, that does say fight for 2 damage with any skill. And in fact, you could have it be a 6-shot gun that gives you +2 to your book and shoots with book on a Seeker for 10 experience. But generally speaking, even though that's like alarming game design and you can really worry about what that might cause, I think the experience cost of this is pretty high. The resource cost of putting it in play is like on par for a gun, but that's still expensive, especially in people who weren't playing guns and don't have the money for guns. It's in the most contested item slot in the hand slot. I think the big fear is just like the 2 experience version. Is it okay for, let's say, Mandy Thompson to shoot at 5 for 2 damage? And I think the answer is yeah, of course it is. Like, it's not aggressively powerful. It allows anyone to flex into anything, but it's not super efficient in the way that you're spending experience and resources to get there. It does homogenize things a bit, but I like that it allows you to theoretically turn any character into a flex character. I don't think it's overpowered. I don't think it does so much that it messes with game balance in a big way. Next, let's talk about the 2 investigators I haven't really gotten to test at all yet, Amina Zidane and Carson Sinclair. First up, I actually think Carson Sinclair is a really good character. He has this awkward thing where you have to figure out how he's going to survive the Mythos phase and how he's going to contribute with his terrible stat line. But as a flex character, he gets to just give your Kluver an action every turn. And I want to be clear, that's really, really good. Because if you think of it as like, oh, you have another action on turn 1, it's not the biggest deal, that's really incorrect. It's much more like if you have a 15-turn game, at the end of that you had a fully set up Seeker, right? What could they have done with 15 more actions? Because essentially you're giving them the 15 actions that they wouldn't have gotten in a normal game, all at the end. You're speeding up how they set up, and then they're just getting more actions. And I think in general, on most Cluevers, if you're your team's main Cluever, you're probably getting more than a clue an action. Which means Carson Sinclair successfully flex finds clues just by using his ability on the Cluever. Which means you have to do very little to then contribute enough to be a good character. Whether you're finding more clues or mitigating the Mythos deck or flex fighting, and I think the way to go is flex fight plus Mythos mitigation. I think it's really easy to see Carson Sinclair become a strong character. I don't think he'll ever be busted, and he obviously gets better with better teammates. But I think he is definitely a strong investigator, although I can see why people might consider him boring. And he also gets to do gross things with practice makes perfect. Because, like, of course, as you wish is practiced, why wouldn't it be? Selfless to a fault doesn't seem that bad, because as I said a second ago, you're running a practice makes perfect deck, you have a lot of skills. This should be relatively easy to trigger. At the very least, you shouldn't have to worry about drawing it more than like twice a cycle ever, and probably not even that. Coming up to Amina, her ability is like just lightning bolt emergency cash if you can mitigate the doom. That's a pretty big if. The only real way to do that is either immediately connecting it to L with 2, which is a 2 experience card, so you can't do it scenario 1, or to have Sin Eater, which Sin Eater is going to make it vary in value a lot, because if you have to get rid of the Doom immediately, then it was actually just an emergency cache with extra steps. But if you can wait like 3 turns and use her ability 3 times, then you gained 9 resources for 1 action, and it's really, really good. So Amina Zidane's ability is great. Her star, I'm gonna be honest, her star kinda sucks. There's only one thing her star ever really does that's busted. The wording on Abyssal Tome prevents you from adding Doom to it as part of the action, but it doesn't limit the maximum amount of Doom on it. Let me go find it to be sure of this. So the Abyssal Tome is a 2 experience, 2 cost, hand asset, item tome, action, exhausted, fight. You may use either book or head for this attack instead of fist. When you initiate this attack, you may place 1 Doom on Abyssal Tome to a maximum of 3. You get +1 skill value and deal +1 damage with this attack for each Doom on Abyssal Tome. So while you're limited to putting Doom up to 3 with the Abyssal Tome, if through other means you already have like 5 Doom on this, it does swing for 6 at +5. So the only real use for this star is to move Doom onto the Abyssal Tome above its max, but that's like a thing that's gonna be really hard. Mostly the star is just a blank. It is cool that it can interact with Abyssal Tome in this way, or that it can get you Doom on Sin Eater faster if for some reason you needed that, but on the whole, I think her star is basically blank. 5/9 soak is never what you want to see. 5 in a stat is just kind of hard to mitigate, and unfortunately for Mystics, they're not the best at mitigating health damage. They can always run Deny 5, they can always just invest experience into not dying ever, but you don't want to do that if you don't have to. The big issue with Amina Zidane is that she has the Jenny Barnes Lola Hayes stat line, which is terrible, and since all of the cards in Mystic basically only care about head, there's like some new cards and some niche cards that are older that allow you to use your other skills. But generally speaking, this is just a terrible stat line, even if there are cards you can use to work around it. Her signature is Ancient Evils, just like always. There's no way around it whatsoever. And her signatures Word of Woe and Word of Wheel. They aren't bad. Place Doom on an asset, then trigger its ability. If it's in your discard pile, you may put Word of Wheel back in with Woe and vice versa. This one's actually pretty good for fighting. It allows you to essentially refresh and double use your Abyssal Tome. So instead of swinging at +1/+1, you can swing at +1/+1, then use Word of Woe and swing at +2/+2, which is a lot more. And Word of Wheel is not nearly as good, unfortunately. This just says pass the skill test and shuffle Woe back in, basically. And on any other Mystic, it might actually say pass the skill test, but in this case, it's only adding 3, so you could probably still fail. But yeah, the signatures really don't do that much. It's mostly just synergy with Abyssal Tome, which is an incredibly core card thanks to the new card El Rubash. Like, I should just get her out now and talk about her. 3 cost, 2 experience, ally asset, 1/2 soak. You get +1 skill value when resolving a skill test on an attached asset. 1 doom on each attached asset does not count towards the agenda's doom threshold. And you can exhaust her to attach an asset with doom on it. She can hold up to 2 assets. So, you run El, and you run Abyssal Tome. And now you have a doomed asset in play for the purpose of synergies. You're swinging Abyssal Tome at +2 to hit for +1 to damage, and any doom synergies you have will trigger. This is a very core part of Amina and Marie, where now you have a good way of flex fighting, and Marie gets her ability triggered every single turn for that additional spell action. El is insane. Sin Eater is still good, but El is the real thing that pushes the doom archetypes into viability. Sin Eater being the permanent exceptional card for the Doom archetype, where you exhaust it to move a Doom from another asset to Sin Eater, and then you can either ready that asset or place a charge on it, and then as an action you can remove all Doom from Sin Eater. So this allows you to purge out Doom, but generally the way Marie's gonna end up playing with Doom is just having enough on El to trigger her abilities and not actually stacking Doom very much. This is nice to have for a bunch of synergies it enables, but 6 experience is a big buy-in. And I think it's much more likely to see play on Amina than it is on Marie. And I'm not sure anyone else justifies playing the Doom archetype. But I'm talking about Marie for a reason here, because Amina is clearly doing the Doom archetype, right? And getting a bunch of emergency caches is nice, but getting an extra action every turn is a lot better. And previously the problem with Marie is that you couldn't reliably trigger her ability to get that extra action, but now that you can just hang out with Doom on an item on El, it's a lot easier to trigger Marie's ability. And if I'm going to be playing a Doom Mystic, it seems like Amina's just worse than Marie. Coming down to the customizable cards, Alchemical Distillation is one where I look at this and I'm not really sure what it's for. Which checks out, because it can do basically anything. So it's not particularly clear what it's for either. I keep rambling while trying to say this. Alchemical Distillation seems like it can do everything, but in a Seeker, where most of these things aren't necessary, you're not doing any of them efficiently, I just don't see the point in investing your experience here instead of doing something else. I've talked about Runic Axe before in my previous video, so I'll do it now quickly. Runic Axe is seemingly a very good weapon for flex fighting, but not great for main fighting, as it takes up both of your hands and doesn't recharge fast enough to get through any big surge of enemies. Because the thing that a fighter is worried about isn't killing one enemy a turn. It's what happens if you draw 2 enemies and deal with one, and the next turn the boss spawns, and the turn after that you draw another enemy. Like, how do you deal with the pile up? And Runic Axe doesn't. Even with Saga, you're still going to struggle if you have a big enemy pile up and you're the main fighter. But as a flex fighter, this works a lot better, even though it does still eat both your hands. I'm not convinced it's amazing, but I do think it's good in that niche. Hunter's Armor is a customizable 4-cost 2/2 soak body armor. And when you look through what it can do, easily the most compelling thing it can do is Hex Shrinker, where you draw cards after it takes damage from a treachery effect. You can do the Armor of Thorns guard dog thing and try to be a porcupine tank thing. But really, I look at all of this, I look at the experience of committing to soak, I'm just like, man, why am I not just buying Charismas and Brother Xavier's? It's like, that's not in every blue deck. There are other ways to accomplish this goal. And there's a lot of experience that goes into making this good. It also strictly doesn't work with Flamethrower, which in a post-Cyclopean Hammer world is the best weapon in the game. It's not the best weapon by too much though, it's not that much better than a survival knife setup. Still, it limits you. It costs experience, it costs card slots, it costs economy, and it prevents you from using Flamethrower. And I'm not sure it's doing anything that to me seems like it's worth all of that. Custom Modifications is one of the few cards in the game that counts as a draw engine because of the counterbalance upgrade, where every time you play an upgrade onto the Custom Modifications card, you get to draw another card. The issue there is that aside from like well-maintained and reliable, there aren't very many upgrades and none of them are cheap. I think this is probably on the whole a buff to something like a Super Becky deck where you get a lot more draw out of this. Because it's a supply, you can put it under Stick to the Plan and guarantee that your first firearm gets this. It lets you re-roll really bad tokens other than the autofill, even at the base level, which is so nice. Getting +2 while fighting and then dealing an extra damage if you succeed by 3 or more is really good. It's going to turn a lot of misses into hits, and it's going to turn a lot of hits into hits for more damage. this seems like a very strong card. Like all the customized cards I've been talking about, it costs a lot of experience. I know that you only have to upgrade this once and it applies to both, I'm aware of this, but it's still a lot of experience. We're talking about Counterbalance, Quicksilver Bullets, and Extended Stock, which is an 8 experience card. And unlike all the other ones I've been talking about, if you bought them separately or together, it wouldn't even matter, because like I said, you can put one of these under Stick to the Plan, at which point there's really no reason to even have a second one in the deck. But I do think this is a really compelling card for trying to turn other firearms into a main gun and build a draw engine in blue. Pocket Multi-Tool does everything. I love this card. As a reaction, you get +1 skill value to whatever you're doing. It's a 3-cost hand slot. You can't hold 2 of them, unfortunately. Which does make me very sad, because I would love to hold 2 of them, because of Spring Loaded. This lets you use it as a reaction when you would fail a skill test. And then you can get, what is it called? Detachable, so that everyone at your location can use it. And you can make it good at evading, or doing treachery tests, or attacking, or investigating. And if you fail a test, you can just ready it. And the way I see this getting used most often is you take Spring-Loaded, Detachable, Pry Bar, and whatever your job is. That way, anyone at your location can use this reaction for a lucky on their Mythos test. And then if no one needs that somehow, you get +2 to a barely failed test at whatever your job is, probably investigating. Pocket Multi-Tool, as always, costs a shitload of experience, but it is one of the customizable cards where I look at this and I see a compelling reason to play it. Makeshift Trapped is the complete opposite. This one costs a lot of experience, and I'm not sure what it does. It's a 1-cost event, customizable, uses 2. If it has no uses discarded, attach it to your location. Every non-elite enemy here gets -1 fight and evade. At the end of the round, remove 1 time from it. So you can make it last longer. You can make it only lose time if there are enemies at the location, which is just another form of lasting longer. You can make it fast and lightning bolt playable. You can have its forced effect to deal damage to enemies at that location. You can attach it to a revealed location. You can make it so that non-elite enemies at that location cannot move or make attacks, which is probably the strongest one we've seen so far. Most of this, I'm like reading it, wondering why I care. An explosive device, it's a bomb, congratulations, it's now 1-cost dynamite blast on a timer. I feel like I would never play this unless I was playing a scenario where I knew it mattered. Like, I can think of a specific scenario in Call of the Plague Bearer where explosive device could be good. This card has so much text on it, I'm not convinced any of it does something I care about. Alright, I don't care what Grizzled says. I don't care how good Grizzled is. I hate Grizzled. I despise this card. Look at this. It is a card that's going to give you question marks, and a lot of them, against specific traits. And you can get always prepared, so it comes back to your hand every time you draw it. And that's really good, but you have to do so much meta-analysis. You have to like look at the encounter sets and do math to determine what traits are supposed to go on this, and I hate that so much. Grizzled is a great card, and I'm never going to play it, because I don't want to go through the trouble of optimizing it. It's so unfun to think about. Friends in Low Places is theoretically similar, but it's only your own deck, not 8 different encounter sets, so it's tremendously more intuitive to optimize this. And as opposed to getting 3 question marks, which might or might not be that valuable depending on what the test even is, this is just drawing cards from your deck at a cost, which is something every character likes, and green characters don't have that many ways of doing. The obvious things you can pick for traits are things like Ally or Innate, where most green characters have multiple allies and most good green skills are innate. There are definitely other traits you can pick depending on your deck composition, but I can absolutely see this card having multiple homes, where you pick Experienced and Versatile to look through 9 cards for 2 different traits and buy basically everything you see in a big money deck. I don't think Friends in Low Places is in any way bad. If it doesn't get played, it's likely to be as a result of green cards simply costing too much experience to afford that one. So Damning Testimony, I just realized takes up a hand slot. I've always been thinking it was the person giving the testimony. It's not, it's the stack of files, apparently. I'm not really sure. Maybe the hand slot is her pointing. I didn't know this took a hand slot, and it really lowers my opinion on it, which was already not a great opinion. It's a 4-cost, 3-use asset that takes up a hand slot. You exhaust it and choose an enemy at any location. You investigate your own location, and if you succeed, you can spend an evidence to discover an additional clue at the chosen enemy's location. This obviously has the most potential for use in Trish, because Reaction actually discover a clue at a location with an enemy, either discover an additional clue or automatically evade them. So there's some very direct synergy between these cards. And this doesn't even say non-elite, so you could theoretically evade the boss by getting a clue from its room without ever being there, which is a huge amount of team utility, as well as just like the ability to use tempo and get clues. There's a clear home here for Trish, to the point that I'm surprised it's not obviously her doing the testimony. But in my head, I'll just imagine she's in a disguise. The options for damning testimony are that you can ignore keywords on your location. That's not that good. It's cheap, but it's not that good. You can get 2 additional uses, which since it costs so much, it's nice to go up from 3 to 5. You can get blackmail for bonus book while investigating. You can get the ability to spend an evidence to automatically evade the enemy, which on Trish literally doesn't matter. You can get surveil so that you can use the ability to investigate the chosen enemy's location instead of your own. But again, that's not that necessary. It does help you take clues from across the map a little bit better, but for 3 experience, you probably have better things to get. And at 4 for expose, when you successfully investigate, you may spend X evidence to discard the chosen enemy if it's non-elite. X is that enemy's rating health. Holy shit, that should cost 1. The only use this has, and it does have a use, is if you're playing before the Black Throne, because then you can spend 1 evidence to kill acolytes that are across the map. And like every other scenario, expose is like you're spending all of your assets, all of your evidence rather, to kill a 2 or 3 health enemy that didn't matter. Expose is only useful for killing acolytes, which honestly it's really, really good at, but I'm not sure there are many characters where I'm spending 4 experience to be better at killing acolytes. It does have its home. I think this card as a whole has a home in Trish, and I think Expose specifically has a home in certain encounters. But I also think outside of Trish, I had a hand slot in 4 cost that just isn't doing enough. Like yes, rogues do struggle to investigate and compress clues. However, this doesn't investigate with your foot, and none of its upgrades let you do that, which makes sense. It's going to be hard to convince a judge with your tap dance routine. But yeah, as a result, I don't know how this gets played outside of Trish. However, in Trish, it's obviously good. Power Word is a card that does one specific thing that might work in some scenarios that I think is really, really good. One of the things you can upgrade Power Word to do, I guess let's start with this. It's a 3-cost event, you attach it to a non-elite, and that enemy gains action parlay give a command. The initial commands being, walk away from me, or exhaust yourself. However, one of the things you can get on Power Word is Distract. Automatically evade any enemy at this location with an equal or lower evade value than this enemy. So if you have a non-elite enemy with higher foot than an elite boss enemy, you can use the Distract parlay to auto-evade the boss, which is really cool. But that doesn't sound like it comes up that often. This is a card that's just a 3-cost event to never have to deal with an enemy, but it's still action taxing you to exhaust it. Stuff like Mercy and Betray have very limited and random value that I don't feel like I can plan around. Confess is not gonna work very often because very, very frequently your Shroud value is going to be higher than the health of the enemy. Greater Control sounds good until you realize you have to pay 3 more resources to play it out the second time, so returning it to your hand isn't even that good. And then the last 3 are all really cool, but I'm not convinced any of them are actually that good. Tongue Twister seeming like the best one because you will likely want to use 2 commands. On the whole, I'm just not convinced any version of Power Word is really worth the cost of being a 3-cost event that's not actually dealing with enemies, and seems very hard to predict the usage you'll be getting out of it. Especially because Mystics have so many things that are already worth spending experience on. It's very normal for you to be like, yeah, this is a 60 experience Mystic deck, but because of Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research, it's really only a like 45 experience Mystic deck, which is an attainable end goal in many can be. So when I see something like this of nebulous value that's costing me a lot of experience, I just don't know how it fits into a Mystic. Summon Servitor has a whole lot of text, but after reading all of it, mostly what I see is a janky Mystic Pathfinder, and nothing else on this really seems that good. All of these abilities that do things at base 4 are not actually that valuable. The best one being Investigate, because then you can use it as lightning bolts to deal with like 2 Shroud, 1 Shroud locations if they're available. But experience cards are usually not going in your deck to deal with low Shroud locations. You can use Armored Carapace to get some soak out of it, Wings of Night so that it's a really janky form of Pathfinder. You probably have to take Dominance to get rid of the Arcane slot or the Ally slot, depending on the deck, which one's usually going to be the Arcane slot as a Mystic card. Dreaming Call makes it easier to play. Demonic Influence lets it do both the Investigate and the move, but like at the end of this is the jankiest version of Pathfinder in the world to me, and I can't really imagine it being easy to play in any deck. I don't think this has a home, and if it does, I do think Wings of Night is why it's there. Living Ink is cool. It's just a +1 to a skill. It's a purple card, so let's be honest, it's a +1 to your head. Then you come over to its upgrade sheet, and you can play it under the control of other people, but that's probably not what you're doing. You can give it Subtle Depiction, so you can choose not to lose a charge. And while that's nice, if you played this, you probably want the ability on almost every turn. Imbued Ink gives it additional charges, which is very good. Eldritch Ink lets you circle another skill, and the main reason for this is to circle Foot in addition to Head, so that when you pick Vibrancy, it's going to give you +2 to your foot instead of -2 to your foot. Eldritch Ink is nice, but not in a general sense. Since you're already circling Head, you probably circle Foot with the first Eldritch Ink. That way you can take Vibrancy at the bottom to get +2 to both Mythos skills, and a -1 to stuff you'll never use, as opposed to having your +2 Head be at the cost of -1 foot during the Mythos phase. Which is all the whole relatively minor, but still a pretty big upgrade compared to not having the Eldritch Ink. And Macabre Depiction is how you actually get your additional charges after you reveal a Chaos token with a symbol, exhaust Living Ink, and get a charge, which will likely make these last basically forever. So yeah, I think Living Ink definitely has a home. I think forehead mystics look at this and they see a reason to pick it, and there could definitely be some off-class purple uses of this that would be pretty interesting. I don't think it's the best card in the game, but I definitely think there are decks that run this, especially on higher difficulties where skills matter more. Or rather, where attribute values matter more. And now we can move through all of the normal cards that are left. We should be able to go through these at a much faster pace, because customization cards just take a lot longer to talk about. Let's start with the Seeker stuff. Map the Area. This is a Seeker card that has the dreaded text, Investigate, instead of discovering clues at this location. And I think the same thing of this that I think of all cards that say that. Don't play it. It's bad. Your job is to get clues. You're a Seeker, your job is to get clues. Do not take book tests that don't get clues. The Section Tools is a really interesting card. It parallels the Hawkeye folding camera for the opposite stats. It still gives you sanity instead of health, I guess because it wouldn't make sense that being really good at dissecting makes you suddenly bulkier. But as a hand slot item that's giving you +1 fist, it lives in a really awkward place, where if you want the +1 fist, you probably want the hand slot to hold a weapon. At the end of it, I'm just not convinced that this really has a home in any deck. Even in Kaimani, where I thought initially this would be really good, the hand slot tax, the time to play it, it just doesn't feel like a card that has a home to me. Now, Fingerprint Kit is a card that we always make fun of, because every time we ever run Fingerprint Kit, we're reminded of the fact that it costs too much and does too little, and there are better things Seeker can do. However, with the upgraded Fingerprint Kit, I'm inclined to acknowledge that this is basically Rite of Seeking with no downside, right? Like, this is Investigate at +2 for 2 additional clues 3 times. That's basically a Mystic spell, just a little bit more expensive with no downside. And once you're getting that much out of it, maybe because Seekers can cycle their deck so much, they can use something like Emergency Supply 4 to refill this. Sorry, Emergency Supply 3, the one that gives you 4 supplies and you can put them on cards instead of gaining them as resources. And then you cycle your deck and you just always use this. Like, this is actually so much clue finding power that I'm inclined to acknowledge that unlike the baseline Fingerprint Kit, this might have a home. Guidance 1 is just Guidance 0, except I believe the first level Guidance costs a resource, and additionally it doesn't give them +1 to all their skills. If you were playing Guidance, you probably want Guidance 1. Which is to say this is a Carson Sinclair card, no one else runs this. Lab Coat is a terrifying card, because this just is a body slot item that gives Seekers +1 to every skill test on a Seeker card. Which luckily Seekers tend not to take skill tests on Seeker cards, otherwise this would be completely busted, because on top of that it also gives you 1/1 soak because it's just a really, really good card. The main thing this does is it could potentially have a home in like that Fingerprint Kit deck I was just talking about, where you're constantly testing on a Seeker asset. I don't think Lab Coat's crazy. I think There are a lot of really good Seeker cards competing with this, and I don't think it gets into many decks. Maybe it doesn't get into any decks. But I think you can play Lab Coat and still have a good time with it. It's just getting outclassed by all the other broken Seeker garbage. Orphic Theory is a 2-cost arcane asset with 4 secrets. You can spend a secret to choose any non-weakness treachery not attached to an elite enemy. Until the end of the round, treat that card's printed text box as if it were blank except for traits. I guess they thought that Seekers, as well as Mystics, should be able to pretend that the Vengeance mechanic doesn't exist in Forgotten Age, because God forbid anyone has an ability that Seeker doesn't. And this is better than Mind Blank because you get to cast it 4 times instead of once. Is it even called Mind Blank? What the hell is that card? Mind Wipe. Yeah, this tech card that you previously only ran in Mystics and Forgotten Age, now Seekers just have a better version of it. And that's my full opinion on this. This is counter tech to Vengeance and nothing else. Why is it a Lightning Bolt? It's so much better than Mind Wipe, holy shit. Why do Seekers get this? Like, it's not a Seeker card thematically at all. And it's just like this is like Mind Wipe 7. That's how much better it is than Mind Wipe. And it's still never getting run. Like, you only run this in Forgotten Age if you don't have a way of dealing with Vengeance, which you probably don't. So you probably run this in Forgotten Age. But man, holy shit, it's so much better than Mind Wipe. I just deleted Orphic Theory, it's already gone, but I do want to actually, I'm amused by it, it's funny. I hate that that card exists. That was a niche that only Mystics got, and we just gave it to Seekers. Except tremendously better at it. It's a shame I've already done Seekers only Forgotten Age, right? Would have been great to have that around. Making Preparations is another dilemma card, but unlike the others, I don't think this one is crazy. This one, you pick 2 skills to get +1/2 and 2 skills to get -1/2. It's only the investigation phase, so like in almost every situation, you're probably saying Book Fist or Head Fist. Like, you're gonna know exactly what it is every time. Don't run this if you have like a fist-based fighter and a mystic and a foot-based rogue. But even if you are in a situation where you have a very clear answer to this, that's just +1 to everyone's skills for the entire round, like, is it really worth the card slot? You don't know that you're drawing this. Like, this is one of the ones where you would want to draw it on a specific turn with Katja. I just don't think this is worth a card slot, and she's worth the card slot of the experience. And on the whole, I think this is just a little bit underwhelming. Baseball Bat got the upgrade I've always wanted, and it actually feels like a really survivory card now. Fight, you get +2, it deals +1 damage. If you get a skull or a auto fail, then pick 1. Return it to your hand, infinitely easier to deal with than discarding it, or discard it but you deal +1 damage. And that second one's actually better in some cases if you have methods of easy, fast recursion, like Scavenging 2, I don't know who runs that in Baseball Bat, but more importantly, like Yorick. So yeah, I think generally this Baseball Bat upgrade is an easier penalty to deal with, because a lot of red fighters don't have easy ways of recurring their weapons. Yorick is obviously the exception here, but Baseball Bat 2 is much more broadly playable than the original one. Fickle Fortune is a card I really want to think is good, but I'm sure if I ever play with it, I'll regret it intensely. You choose between placing a Doom on the agenda to heal everyone for 3/3, which is a huge amount. Like, healing everyone for 3/3 is just more than you could do if everyone spent an entire turn healing. So if you need to heal, that's the best it can be. Or you remove a Doom from the agenda and everyone takes 1/1 direct damage and horror. So obviously you're not playing this in Calvin, and after that you would remove Fickle Fortune from the game. If you were Calvin, you would also not really care about the difference because you would be dead. But I think that you're gonna find very, very often if you play Fickle Fortune that you're having to take place 1 Doom on the agenda, heal 3/3, because the take 1/1 direct is a little bit too spooky. And maybe you didn't need the time, or you didn't want to take the damage, and you didn't really need to heal. And now you spent 3 experience and you didn't get your card draw, and the effect was somewhere between negligible to actively negative. I think Fickle Fortune has a really hard time. Like, if this just said pick one, if it wasn't a dilemma, right? If this was a fast event, this card would be insane. But it's not, and as a consequence of being forced to play it when you draw it, I think it's actually not even deserving of being at 3 experience, and I think it will probably make most decks worse. Salvage is really cool. Specifically, the reason I like Salvage is it allows you to run a Salvage plus short supply setup to help get non-red assets like Tommy's Becky. So I think this is a really cool thing for short supply synergy, which didn't quite have enough before this existed. The fact that you can choose to remove it from the game and gain resources equal to its cost, like you're not playing it if that's your goal. This is not an economy card. The fact that it can be used as that is nice in case you've already gotten Becky with your first salvage, I guess. Like there's other uses for it, it's not just dead. But the main thing this is it allows for an incredibly consistent Tommy deck to reliably hit Becky every time. And Heed the Dream is a card that I feel very blah about. Instead of drawing a card, you're going to build 3 piles of cards, where each player puts the top card of their deck into each of the piles. So in a 3-player game, you have 3 piles of 3 with 1 card from each character. And then you pick 1 pile to draw and you discard the other 2. Now, provided your other characters are not expecting to cycle their deck, this is just better than not having done that. There's no difference in discarding those 2 cards and having those 2 cards be the bottom of the deck. Anything you say about that is entirely results-oriented based around what you just saw. Statistically, it's the exact same. However, if you have somebody who's cycling their deck, that changes, and Seekers tend to do that. At this point, I think red characters might also be able to do it with their new version of Deep Knowledge if they build a deck that tries to cycle the deck. But I'm worried that this could interfere with a lot of characters. I do think you can buy this card and have it be good, provided no one's playing combo decks, provided that no one is cycling their deck and expecting to see all the cards in their deck. It's good in that situation. But being good in the situation where you're not playing with a Seeker is not a good place for a card to live. You want to be playing with a Seeker. Heed the Dream's a good card, but the fact that it has anti-synergy with the best class in the game is not a pleasant thing. Looking at the new green cards, we've got Disguise, 3 cost, 0 experience, 4 use talent. As an action, you evade and spend a supply, you get +2 foot for this attempt. If you succeed and it's not elite, it doesn't ready during the next upkeep phase. This is useful again in things like Kaimani and Trish, where maybe you might evade somebody but not be able to kill them, or you might evade them and keep them at your location to get more clues next turn. But on the whole, I think most characters don't just have unlimited turns and unlimited resources to play all this shit. There's already a lot of assets you care about in green decks, and I don't see Supply making the cut in any of them. Or sorry, Disguise. I don't know why I just called it Supply. It has supplies. My brain just failed. Calculated Risk is a card I really want to like, but I don't know where it goes. You can only commit it to a skill test you're performing during your turn, and it ends your turn, and you get a question mark for every action you've taken. So essentially, in any deck that wants to run Calculated Risk, it says pass the last check of your turn unless you auto-fail. Which is cool, and you're going to pass by a lot, which helps things like Cigarette Case. But like, you ran this in your deck, you put it here over something else, and it doesn't help you during the Mythos phase, which is like where I would really want a big pile of question marks is during the Mythos phase. During my turn, I can usually handle the checks that I'm choosing to take. So I'm not sure that Calculated Risk is worth the card slot. I'll definitely play with it at some point, but I don't know if it's actually a good card in any capacity. Kicking the Hornet's Nest is awesome. I love this card. I love it thematically. I love what it does. It actually seems strong. You search the top 9 cards of the encounter deck for an enemy, spawn and engage with you. You break through aloof, you break through spawn conditions, and then you get a clue at your location. You gain resources equal to its health, and that's just great. If you're a fighter with access to this card, you can help with clues, do something on a turn where there are no enemies, get resources on top of it. Like, this card is really good. Green cards are usually overcosted. I would have expected to be like, oh god, why is it 2 experience? But instead, it's just a good card, and I'm really happy it exists. And of course, the best place to play it is in Mark because it's a tactic for some reason. That's just normal for green cards, isn't it? The best place to play a green card is in someone else's color. Hidden Pocket would be the worst card in the world if Underworld Market didn't exist. But because you can put this in your Underworld Market and you only ever draw this if you wanted it, that is really good. Now you can afford to do dumb things where you make your Switchblade take up no hand slot, essentially. You can use Underworld Market to buy more hand slots to hold more things. And since most of the rogue hand assets are illicit things, lockpicks, thieves kits, guns, this almost always works. So I don't think this is good. I do think that spending 2 resources, 1 to buy it from the Underworld Market, 1 to play it, and then in addition having to have played the additional assets, I think like all of that is a little bit too much. You do need clothing or armor, but if you're playing this, I assume you're also playing guns, which means you're playing Alani and you're playing a jacket already for the infinite soak combo with +1 fist, and then this is easy enough to play. Like, it can fit into decks, but I feel as though, even though it fits into decks and it does a thing, you don't want to play that hard into the setup archetypes. You just don't want to set out that much. Just like Bandolier. I think this is the best a Bandolier card has ever been, and I still don't think you should run it. But the difference is that sometimes you're playing an Underworld Market deck, and there are really only 6 cards you care about in the Underworld Market. So you can just afford to like randomly run Hidden Pocket in there as a one-of to eventually get a hand slot if you want it. Stylish Coat says gain a shitload of resources eventually, but unlike all of the other coats, this one can't be fixed by Lonnie. And if I'm playing a coat, it was probably to get it fixed by Lonnie, so in a lot of decks, this just doesn't work because you need Lonnie to be fixing something. In the decks where you weren't running Lonnie and you can just run this as additional income, it's fine. It's a Lone Wolf with Soak but no condition if you didn't need the body slot, provided you gain resources from a card every turn, which isn't that hard to do. It's a nice way to put some more money into a green deck that needs a shitload of money without spending 8 experience on double-double. I think that's my big opinion of it, but I'm not sure how many decks really run this. Breaking and Entering 2 should just have already existed. I'm glad it does now. I don't have any strong opinions about it. Breaking and Entering is a good card. Recurring it and playing it over and over again if your deck can afford to do so is obviously great. And Baby Truck Fergus is the card I was happiest to see. And it's possible you never even buy the big truck. You only need the first part. You need the soak. You need to make your things cheap or make them fast. But you don't necessarily need both. So I don't really mind not upgrading Chuck. I just really like seeing that I can get Chuck early if it's core to my deck. That's just really nice to see. Coming over to Guardian cards, I'm gonna talk about Field Agent first because it broke my heart. I looked at this and I was aghast. I was like, oh my god, let's build the Carolyn deck. We're gonna get free clues, heal the horror off of the Field Agents, and just do it over and over again. Testless clues for days. It's gonna be great. We just run all the cards that draw cards so we can do this as quickly as possible, get both of these guys out. There are like no cards that actually heal horror from assets. If you see something that says heal and it doesn't specify, that's not vague and allows you to heal an asset. It's shorthand for heal an investigator. And as a consequence, it is a very, very hard to heal Field Agent. Ironically, Field Agent is at its best in someone who is on a team with Carolyn, because then they can give you a Solemn Vow and you can take the Field Agent's horror, put it on their Pete Sylvester, and that'll work. But you can't Solemn Vow yourself to move Field Agent horror to Pete. So actually healing this Field Agent is janky and difficult and really hard to do. The best way to do it is with Soothing Melody 3. That way you can constantly heal 2 every turn, 1 from each Field Agent, and shuffle it back into your deck. And you try to bottom out your deck and just do that repeatedly. And there is a combo Carolyn deck with that, but outside of that, I'm not sure who this is for. It's a lot like Alice Luxley, except I think it's better where it goes in Alice Luxley, but god, the fact that it's so hard to heal the horror from this is just rough. It's really just Hallowed Mirror that's a good way of doing it. And I think maybe Ancient Stones, can Ancient Stones even heal allies? Yeah, Ancient Stones can heal allies, it's okay. So that's good. So between Hallowed Mirror and Ancient Stone, there are ways for Carolyn to build combo decks with this, but it's a lot more restrictive than you might initially think. And that's pretty much the only home I think this card really has. There's just not quite enough clue finding blue cards for a blue Kluber to be a thing yet. As well, Carolyn's like also already the only person who has the stats for that in the first place. Coming over to Obsidian Bracelet, it's a 3-cost hand asset with 3/3 soak, and it can only absorb damage from treacheries, but that's where most of your damage and horror is coming from. And it can also be used for investigators at your location, so you'll have no trouble using all 3/3 of the soak. But blue is a class that always wants more money, and it always wants more hand slots, and it's real hard to figure out exactly what Obsidian Bracelet is for. I know what it's for. You run this in level 0 Carson Sinclair, probably. You just need this to live until you get Brother Xavier. I think that's why this card exists. I'm not sure what else you do with it. Helping Hand doubles the effect of every other skill card, except it only doubles the icons, and usually the best part of skill cards are the text. And when that's not the case, it's like Promise of Power, and Promise of Power already has 4 you didn't need anymore. I'm honestly not sure what Helping Hand is for. This feels like the jankiest form of unexpected courage to me. Like, when is this better than unexpected courage? I don't have an answer to that. And I think I'm just right about that. I don't think Helping Hand has a place anywhere. Just run unexpected courage. Fighting Lessons is a cool card. You cross map, throw it to anybody for fighting or evading at +2. I don't know why Fighting Lessons has 1 fist, 1 foot, 1 wild instead of 2 fist, 2 foot, because you can only commit it to attack and evasion attempts. I guess this lets you use it on head attempts from Mystics when they're doing those tests. But that seems like if you're using Fighting Lessons on a Mystic, you put the wrong card in your deck, like you just didn't pay attention to who your teammates were. Anyway, the upside of this card is that instead of drawing a card, it is both overpowered in manual decks, and you can use it across the map. That's the big thing it does. I'm not sure I care about that. Especially because usually the blue character is the fighter. So why are you committing skills to somebody else? Why is the person who needs protecting across the map from you? Like, this feels like it's solving all the wrong problems to me. One in the Chamber is the level 0 extra ammo you've never known you wanted, and that honestly is kind of bad. But it does give you an extra bullet. If you don't have anything at level 0 you really want and just want to run the reminder to buy extra ammo, sure, run 1 in the Chamber. Theoretically, there could be something involving you get +3 skill value that's nice, like obviously this is better with a shotgun. There are the effects from custom modifications where you can get an extra bullet from this if you use the extended magazine, I think. So like in a custom modification shotgun deck specifically, this gets a lot better. But outside of that home, this is just kind of nothing to me. Motivational speech is awesome. Obviously, it's great in Charlie Kane. It's also great in Carson Sinclair because it can be used on other investigators at your location as a form of team support. It's just emergency cash for allies, except for some reason it's also a parlay so you don't get hit when you play this if you're engaged with an enemy. I really like motivational speech. This is the kind of new and interesting economy card that I want to see more of. Breach the Door makes me sad. Like, I know that maybe you can play Breach the Door and turn a 6 Shroud location into a 1 Shroud location, and that's absolutely awesome. But also, unless you're so good at fighting that you have nothing better to be doing, why are you running this? Like, I'd rather you be better at fighting and me be better at getting clues, and then you kill the good enemies and I get through the 6 Shroud location. I don't want my fighter to offer to lower the Shroud for me. That's not what I'm looking for from you. That's my job. I built my deck to handle that location. Breach the Door is a lot better if you're playing like fighter, clover, double flex. And then the fighter can like slam down Breach the Door on a 6 Shroud location. The main clover doesn't have to burn their cards getting through it, and the flex characters can obliterate the 1 Shroud location now. Like, there is a home for Breach the Door in specific team compositions, I feel like. But it seems like it's a very narrow card that's not going to be useful in most parties. I've already seen the Bestow Resolve deck where you use all 4 Desperate cards, and that's amazing. I love that. I love running my entire deck is just like 20 copies of Promise of Power, except I don't put curses in the bag. That is such a funny concept for a deck, but all you do is make everyone else pass their skill checks. Weren't they supposed to be doing that already? Like, wasn't that what they planned to do, is pass skill checks with the thing they're good at? I'm not sure what this card is actually for. I'm pretty confident that if you build your deck around Desperate cards and Bestow Resolve, you've made a bad character that doesn't actually contribute very much. I don't know. I look at this and I see that you're spending experience for a limited time use of turning other icons into question marks. And I'm just not really sure if that's actually a thing that was worth doing in the first place, let alone at the cost of limited uses for an experienced card. Ever Vigilant 4 is a big part of why I think Carson Sinclair is nuts. Because I don't think he's just going to be good. I said he was good earlier. I think he might be nuts, and it's because of Ever Vigilant 4. Let's imagine a turn 1 game and 4 player that goes like this. Carson Sinclair has 1 action that he's going to give to himself, and he's going to use it to play Ever Vigilant 4. He gives the other 3 to his teammates. At this point, he's done his turn. The Mythos phase comes around, he gets the next card from Stick to the Plan. It's First Watch. So you can have a first turn where Carson Sinclair gives out 7 actions and 4 resources to his teammates, and then it guarantees that the Mythos phase doesn't interrupt them. That is tremendously more than any character in the game can do. That is the best turn 1 in the game, bar none. It is the highest tempo, the most power, the best in every respect. And he falls off a lot after that point. Like, don't get me wrong, that tempo is about to come crashing down. But Carson Sinclair's turn 1 is incredible because of this card. This card was printed for him, no one else should run it, and it's nuts in him. It also makes Carson Sinclair really awkward to build, because there's a lot of stuff you want to buy, and in addition to stick to the plan of every Gen 4 that's already 10 experience, it would just be nice if the Mythos deck didn't kill you and you actually contributed to the team. There's just a lot of really high priority upgrades on Carson, and it's the main thing I think that's going to hold him back. Gurish Kodaki is an awesome new card that has a lot of potential different homes. As a 4-cost, 4 experience ally, he better be awesome. But at 3/3 soak for anyone at your location, obviously he's competing with Brother Xavier. He's 3 experience more, so he needs to do something better than explode for 2 damage. And he does. Every turn, he can give an investigator at your location +2 skill value for anything. If that's Mythos Resilience, passing a deduction test that was previously close, just over succeeding more for a rogue, you're gonna find a way to get value out of Unexpected Courage every turn, and usually when you use this ability, you'll succeed and he will begin having Infinite Soak. This is Infinite Soak, Infinite Unexpected Courages, well, N Unexpected Courages, where N is the number of turns in the game after you play him. He's a really good card. He's very interesting in something like Vincent, where you can use him to give yourself on the mend constantly. He helps you with your foot weakness. But I'm getting off topic. Gurish is a really, really good card. It's a high experience cost and a high experience color, but I think that'll definitely see play in some decks. Which leaves us with Martyr's Vambrace. There's been a lot of support stuff printed because of Carson. This is no different. It's 2 cost, 2/2 soak, and a next slot. It does run you 3 experience, but it gives you +1 skill value during all encounter cards, which when you have 2/2 defensively, as Joe Diamond can attest, you want that. And as a reaction, you can take the encounter card from someone else at your location. You pretend to draw it instead of them. And that's really good for team support. Martyr's Vambrace and Gurish are some of the more obvious ways that a Carson deck can help his team. You can draw the Mythos cards for them. You can give them boosts to their stats. Stuff like that. And I'm sure that there is a home for Martyr's Vambrace, but I'm not convinced it's even one of the best cards in that home. It's definitely a cool card that will see play somewhere, and it's never going to be terrible. The main reason it's not amazing is just opportunity cost. Which leaves us with the purple cards. And as you can see, there's more purple cards than anything else. We haven't really gotten around to testing this stuff. Let's start with the easiest one. Uncage the Soul 3 is fantastic. Now, instead of being like, oh man, I drew Uncage the Soul after my spells, you draw Uncage the Soul and you're like, nice. And you just replay your empty spell for full value. It's really good. It fixes out some of the draw order issues that Mystics face. It's just good. I'm glad to see it exist. After Uncage the Soul, we need to talk about the no arcane slot archetype. Explosive Ward deals damage equal to the number of empty arcane slots you have. Eldritch Initiation draws a number of cards up to 5 for each arcane slot you have, but then for each filled slot you discard a card. So while draw 5, discard 5 is objectively better than nothing, if you're spending a card to do it, your overall hand size is going down, and then there is a cost. So this is really for empty arcane slots. And Binder's Jar is one of the ways to get arcane slots to be empty. You have this. Anytime you kill a non-elite enemy, you put it underneath the Binder's Jar, and that gives you an additional arcane slot up to 2. And you can discard those enemies to cancel attacks from same traded enemies. I will say that in the vast majority of situations, you never use that last ability. You don't want to discard that enemy. And there are certain scenarios like before the Black Throne, where putting a non-elite enemy underneath your card instead of back into the encounter deck is completely insane, and you just buy this card as a tech choice in Before the Black Throne without even getting its synergy package. So looking at Explosive Ward Initiation, this deals X damage, this draws X cards, where X is your number of arcane slots. And there are other ways to get more arcane slots, but Binder's Jar really is probably the best one. I will say that deal X damage where X is 2 to 4 and draw X where X is 2 to 4 actually does seem like pretty great cards for level 0 cards. But the question is what are you doing with this? And the real answer is this isn't for purple characters. This is for all purple. Binder's Jar is only 1 experience. Yeah, looking at my Safina deck, you could run this in Safina. These are events as well in Safina, so this might fit really, really well in her. The fact this only works on non-elite enemies does sort of suck. I don't know if Explosive Ward is actually all that good. Eldritch Initiation does seem legitimately much better, but if you're running both, you probably do run both. There are some non-elite meatbags wandering around in the campaigns. I really feel like this should not say non-elite. This is just like pointlessly hampering the archetype in a big way, to the point where I wonder if I would even run it in Safina. But in addition to Safina, our other off-class purple characters are who? We've got Daisy. You're not running this in Daisy. Daisy has actually good things that can go into arcane slots and a million other cards competing with this. You're not running this in Daisy. And Patrice, you actually need those arcane slots to do your job to a pretty big degree, so you're not running it in her. And Sister Mary is like a pretty bad character, and I don't think this is the solution to that. So this might have a home in Safina. I'm not convinced it does. But I think if Safina's not running this, then probably no one is. Coming over to String of Curses, I'm not sure what this card is for. Auto-evading non-elite enemies by putting Doom on them to get a clue? Like, that can prevent you from being interrupted pretty heavily, right? Like, let's imagine the Doom doesn't matter this turn. Either the agenda was going to advance, or it's not the difference making the agenda advance and you can deal with it next turn. String of Curses can just auto-evade an enemy you got from the encounter deck, get a clue, and give you the space to play your fighting asset. And that's really cool. But String of Curses is also a card that was in your deck that wasn't something else that you are having for that specific situation. And the more niche cards you have like that, the more clunky and ineffective your decks get. I think String of Curses does a pretty powerful thing. Worst case scenario, it just auto-kills an Acolyte for free. Like that's still something that is valuable. But I'm just not convinced this card has a home. Hollow Chalice is interesting. Like, let's imagine someone at your location has 3 damage on them, right? You could play Hollow Chalice, exhaust it, do the heal for 2, and place 1 Doom on them, and then use the other effect that doesn't exhaust to heal for 1 and remove the Doom. And assuming that you're expected to use it like that, right? That you're expecting to spend 2 actions to heal for 3. That makes this a 0-cost hand-slotted Surgical Kit in purple, right? That's not that good, because Surgical Kit is not good for its double action. Its double action is just to help out Vincent. It's good for its reaction, which this doesn't have. So you could use this as a hand slot asset, and on the turn before the agenda advances, just heal 2, heal 2, heal 2, and turn. But I mean, the agenda's advancing, that implies time might matter. But I mean, heal 6 for your whole turn isn't even that good. Like, most Mystics aren't running Earthly Serenity, and that's what that card does. I don't know, I just don't feel like Hollow Chalice is a good healing card. Costs too much, costs a hand slot, doesn't heal fast enough. I don't know why I would run this. We've got the set of new Mystic assets, we're gonna handle them last. Let's go through the handful of Doom stuff that's left before we get to it. We have the upgraded Moonlight Ritual, fast, remove all Doom from a non-elite card at your location. So now instead of just being your own assets, you can also get rid of the Doom on enemies, which is pretty interesting. You can also get rid of Doom on locations, which I guarantee you in some encounter sets are not balanced around. So I mostly look at this and think, neat, I can break certain scenarios. Because I think even in a Doom deck, I'm probably not running Moonlight Ritual, and I'm certainly not spending experience to upgrade this. Because in a Doom deck, you're running all the expensive Mystic shit you already were. You're running Sin Eater, you're running El Rubash. You don't have the experience for this. This isn't happening. And I forgot to put Astral Mirror with the empty arcane slots archetype. It's a body slot, and for each arcane slot you have that's empty, you get an additional hand slot, and you get an extra action every turn to play an asset into one of those hand slots. I've seen decks built around this, and my reaction has been universally to just like laugh and be like, what does your deck do? Because like, sure, you played a lot of hand slot assets out if you drew things in the right order. Why does having additional hand slots even help a Mystic? The only home for this is like in Daisy, because Daisy doesn't have a body slot. She needs hand slots so you can run this. And then you're spending 2 experience and a resource and a body slot. The body slot probably doesn't matter, but you're still spending that other stuff to get an additional hand slot compared to Arcane Enlightenment, which is just an option you had. I don't know what Astral Mirror is for. I look at this, I'm sure there's a cute deck you can build with it, but I'm not convinced in any way that your cute deck is going to be powerful for running this card. And then we have Ghastly Possession, which combined with El Rubosh is a very interesting card because it lets you put anything under her, and then she can give +1 to any asset. But aside from the synergy with El, it is just Promise of Power and Doom decks if you want it to be. It's 1 question mark worse, but there's very little difference in 3 question marks and 4 question marks most of the time. And if this test is successful, remove a Doom from that asset or replenish half of its uses rounded down is an alternative you could pick. Generally speaking, if you're playing with Doom on an asset and you need to get rid of it, you don't want to be wagering that on a successful test. Replenish half of its uses rounded down sounds really good, but all the clue-finding assets only have 3 uses, so it's just 1 charge. It's much better in a fighter, but in a fighter, you're probably using Abyssal Tome, so Ghastly Possession's not that great there either. It's definitely a good card, but it's just a little bit jankier than it looks at first glance, and I think it's not nearly as good as you might initially read it to be. It's still good though. It definitely has a home in those Doom decks. And so at the very end of it, we finally get to the one thing that was always going to be here. It's our set of Mystic assets that use Brain instead of other skills. This time, rather than having a bunch of charges, they're unlimited use assets, and you pick between placing a Doom or removing a Doom on certain criteria. On the level 0 versions, you pick between Head or get +1 to your base stat for the thing you're doing. And all of them have the option if you defeat an enemy, if you get the last clue, if you succeed by 2 or more. If you do the test and you do well at the test and it finishes the job, remove 1 Doom from it. And the first effect is an exhaust, you get to do it once per turn. For our evasion asset, the Onyx Pentacle is going to be a 3-cost hand asset. You exhaust it, place a Doom on it, and so I stopped and reread this thinking I was missing something. I'm not. What this one gives you for the Doom is you get +1 skill value, and you can target an enemy at your location or a connecting location. But like Spectral Razor, this doesn't work, right? You have to be engaged with an enemy to evade them. You can't evade an enemy that's at another location because you're not engaged with it. Like, how do you start this action? How do you pay the action cost to evade if you're not... Like Spectral Razor, you know what this card does, but the way it's written doesn't do that. It doesn't actually work. But also, this is a terrible card in general. This just gives you +1 foot to evade, or +2 if you add a Doom. Like, that's awful. Use any other evasion asset. What's the better one do? It increases the number from +1 to +2. Yeah, don't run that one. Even if you're running these cards, use a different evasion asset or don't use an evasion asset. In particular for Mystics, the evasion assets always bother me, because like short of Forgotten Age, where you have a clear incentive to not kill things, if you have a card that uses Head to remove the enemy permanently and a card that uses Head to stall the enemy, there's a wrong choice there. And that specific dodge asset is just the worst one in the game. Don't get that one. Dowsing Rod and Ceremonial Sickle are much better cards, but I'm not convinced that anyone wants to run these. They're going to depend a lot on what your other stats are. They're trying to push you away from always using Head. This is because they were printed with Amina Zidane. All her stats are the same, so allowing these to push you towards using those other stats works for her. And consequently, all of these are going to be better in her than in any other Mystic, because the option of getting +1 in your other stat is actually appealing to her. The Dowsing Rod is a 4-cost hand slot asset. It is Action Investigate, Head, or Book +1. The Exhaust and Place Doom version on this lets you move first, which is incredible. That's like the whole reason Ashcan is good, is that Duke is dragging him around and giving him free move actions. This also has the easiest ability to trigger to get rid of the Doom, which is just getting the last clue at your location. So Dowsing Rod, it does cost 4, that's a lot, but it is just a good card. This might actually be playable in Daisy. I mean, she has a million other hand slot assets and it costs a lot, but this is legitimately just a good card. Of course, as a Mystic, you could be getting +2 to a stat you probably have a 5 in and finding 2 clues, so it's like very directly outcompeted, but what this card is doing isn't actually bad. Unfortunately, if you spend 4 experience to upgrade this, you just get +2 book and nothing else. Like, that's all for 4 experience. That's miserable. That's an awful upgrade. So Dowsing Rod, the first one's pretty good, but the upgrade is like never, ever, ever worth it. The upgrade Is there another upgrade that's this inefficient? Once per turn, get +2 to a skill test is what you're spending 4 experience for? Like, I guess that's not completely miserable, it's recursive perception. Not quite because you don't draw, but even trying to make it sound good, 4 experience for +2 skill once a turn is just really minor for an experience card. Ceremonial Sickle is our fight asset this time. Its Doom version is going to give you +1 skill and +1 damage. And this is actually like really hard to make work because a lot of the time you place a Doom on it to kill a guy in 1 hit. So you can't use the second part to get rid of the Doom. Like, this one actually feels very janky. The Dowsing Rod feels good. Ceremonial Sickle can work, but feels jank. The Pentacle does nothing. And is this upgrade any good? Oh, it's the same. It's just the same upgrade Dowsing Rod got. It's terrible. They actually all got the same upgrade. All 3 of the upgrades sucked. So my overarching opinion of those new Mystic Doom assets is the Doom buffs that we got were not really related to those. Like, Dowsing Rod is good. Dowsing Rod is good. The first one, anyway. But those other 5 cards all feel like different stages of being traps. On the whole, I'm really hyped about the new stuff, though. I think there were 3 different archetypes that had Scarlet Keys breathe life into them. Foot-based rogues as a whole, but especially foot-based fighter rogues, got huge buffs from Underworld Market, giving them a degree of reliability they never had before, as well as a bunch of new cards. Clue dropping just became an archetype out of nowhere for Seekers. And while the Doom assets we just talked about suck for Mystics, the Doom cards like El Rubash and Sin Eater go a long way towards making the pre-existing cards in that archetype function cohesively. And then there are a bunch of individually interesting cards, and I do really like the Investigator set for this expansion. I think that I have more hype for this set of cards than I do for most expansions, to be honest. But that perspective might be because I have all the other cards, so seeing it re-enable all these old cards combined with the new stuff and the new mechanics is just really nice. But on the whole, I really like the set, and I'm looking forward to testing out this stack of 70 cards that I really haven't gotten to playtest yet. I've only seen a little under half of the set so far get actually playtested. In particular, I'm really looking forward to playing Daryl sometime soon. I'll be playing it through Dream Eaters off the channel. And I think his archetype is just nuts. I don't know if he's just an incredible investigator or if he's actually broken, and I won't until I play him. But he's definitely good, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him and the new archetype for difficulty 0 with Stella, which is a 4th archetype that exists now. There's not much to it. Difficulty 0 is a pretty small set of cards, but it is a very compelling and powerful set of cards that make you consider building around it. Anyways, my live recording is going for 1 hour and 40 minutes at this point. I just recorded the rest of my card review before this. I'm still sick. I hope I don't sound like complete shit. I'm exhausted. I'm gonna go get something to eat and stop talking about Arkham, because it's been 3 hours. I've been rather incoherent. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about all the cards I haven't gotten to test yet and my first impressions and how I think they're gonna perform. If you have, like, comment, subscribe. You all know the YouTube algorithm drill. It really does help the channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. If you're watching these as they go live, the next video is gonna be a routing video on Scarlet Keys, where I talk about the theory behind how to route efficiently and what I think the best route is, at least for me.